Now, the other day I was talking to a friend of mine who I hadn't talked to in a while, and I brought up all the big name shows that have come out recently, shows like House of the Dragon and Rings of Power, and I asked him if he'd been watching them and what he thought of them. And when we got to me asking him about Andor, which I was excited to do because I'm always eager to hear a more casual fan opinion of the show, which he very much is. He's someone who will proclaim they really, really like Star Wars or they love it, and they're a huge fan, but they don't really get into it or keep tabs on it or anything like that. He's certainly not watching mine or anyone else's Star Wars YouTube videos, which is all fine. I'm not saying you have to devote your life to Star Wars in order to call yourself a big fan. But anyway, his only response when I asked him what he has thought of Andor so far, and I just assumed he was watching it since he's watched all the other Star Wars shows on Disney Plus and enjoyed them to varying degrees. Either way, when I asked him about Andor, all he said back was, "What's that?" Which was, yeah, a little disappointing to hear, because like I said, he's a fan and he's watched all the other shows on Disney Plus and happily given me his unsolicited yet appreciated opinions on the other shows so that I can, as he always says, potentially use them in videos he won't watch. But with Andor, he apparently hadn't even heard of it, though that didn't turn out to be exactly the case because once I started talking about it, it kind of jogged his memory and he basically said, "Oh yeah, that guy from Rogue One, his show." And then he asked me, is it actually any good? As if he expected the answer to just be no. I then went on to tell him it was one of the best things Star Wars I've seen ever, period. And that he should absolutely check it out. And after he does, after he watches a couple episodes, he should shoot me a text or call me with his thoughts. And maybe I'll mention them in a video he'll never watch. He laughed it off and said he'd do just that. And though, yeah, he's a pretty busy guy. So far, a little over a week later, no text back, no word from him. Seems like he hasn't given Andor a chance yet. And though yes, this is purely a anecdotal story and take it or leave it as you will, it still does make me wonder just how many Star Wars fans who are more on the casual side aren't giving this show a chance based on that name alone. I mean, I've even heard from plenty of more hardcore fans in the comments on my videos or elsewhere who say they're not watching it simply because they don't care about Andor, or they'll say, "We know how his story ends, so what's the point in watching this?" Which, though, yeah, I do understand that argument. I don't think it's completely invalid or anything, especially if you know ahead of time the story perhaps ultimately ends rather poorly. There is the whole all roads lead to the sequel trilogy argument made by some, meaning what's any of this matter in the long run, since the story of the rebellion, the story we're seeing in Andor, and the birth of the New Republic ends with Starkiller Base destroying it all in one shot. Nevertheless, you could also make the counter-argument that the reason you do or should watch anything is because it's good and enjoyable in and of itself. That does it really matter if you know how the story ends if the story itself is told extremely well and you end up enjoying it along the way? Isn't the main point of watching anything deemed entertainment to be entertained in the moment or while watching it? I mean, if more or less knowing the end always ruins the story, then what was the point of watching the prequel trilogy because we knew how Anakin's story would eventually end? Or why was anyone excited about the Obi-Wan Kenobi series because we knew how his story not only ends, but also how it begins? This was just going to be a middle part. And yes, I certainly realize Andor is not in the same category as Anakin and Obi-Wan, so it's not exactly the same argument or maybe even a fair one. But that said, he'll never have a chance to be in that category or near it if stories about him are never told. It's hard to become a legacy character if your legacy isn't explored. Though, that said, you could also argue back that, well, he has been in a story, he was in Rogue One, and he didn't exactly shine enough there to warrant more from him in something else, and certainly not enough to be featured in a series or to be the titular character of a series. Which, especially after that talk with my friend and plenty of other comments I've seen about people not watching the show and the reasons why, I do have to agree with that. I do think the biggest mistake Disney and Lucasfilm have made with Andor, and maybe the only major one considering just how good it's been, is what they named it. I really don't think this should have been called Andor, especially considering he hasn't even been the most interesting character in the series, that several others have been far more fascinating. Which actually isn't meant as a criticism of the character or Diego Luna's performance. I think both have been pretty terrific. Problem is, others have simply been better, and some of their performances have been nothing short of award-winning worthy. In fact, I'll be stunned if this show doesn't pull in at least some nominations, if not wins. It's been that amazing of a performance out of some of these actors. And though, yes, Andor has sort of been the focal point of the show, he's kind of the central figure of the story that ties most of the other individual threads together in a way. However, with there being so many great characters, and just so many characters in general when you really stop and think about it, and with that character name Andor being, well, not the most recognizable one in the history of the franchise, certainly not up there with Kenobi and Boba Fett, who have also had shows named after them, it really makes me wonder why name it the way they did. Why not call it something like, as cheesy as it may sound, something like Star Wars The Dark Times or Star Wars The Might of the Empire? I think something like that resonates more with the casual fan. It just immediately grabs your attention and makes you wonder what exactly is this going to be about, more so than calling it Andor. And when you consider just today it was announced that Andor will be airing its first 2 episodes on some Disney-owned stations like ABC, Freeform, and a couple others, and even on Hulu, that it'll be on around Thanksgiving after the last episode premieres actually on the 23rd, I do wonder if it might be a really good idea to add one of those aforementioned titles, or one like it, to maybe call it Andor, Birth of the Rebellion, just for the sake of advertising and marketing here. Because all I know is a lot of people are missing out on, in my opinion, a pretty amazing show simply because of a name they either don't recognize at all or remember as a lackluster character that died in that one movie about the Death Star is holding it back. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to give your thoughts on all of this. Was the name Andor a poor choice, especially considering he's not even close to the only character focused on in the series? Whatever you think, leave your comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.